Good evening. Will the members and our guests please take their seats? This meeting will now come to order. As all members have received a copy of the call of tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As all members have received a copy of the minutes of our May 10th budget meeting, the reading of those minutes will be omitted. Are there any suggested changes to those minutes? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes as submitted stand adopted upon unanimous consent. And I note that, in fact, our attendance at that meeting was 216 present. And in my memory, and if someone can prove us wrong, I believe that's an all-time record. So I commend all those who made the effort to come out, and let's try and duplicate that in the future. All right, David Detchen, who is chair of our Labor Contracts Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM, your Labor Contracts Committee has held its organizational meeting for the current term and elected David Detchen as chairman, Joshua Brown and Joan Caldwell as co-vice chairs, so we have an innovation this time around, and Bob Burns as secretary. At our organizational meeting, we noted that all of us on the committee had sensed during the vetting process that there seemed to be some confusion among the RTM members about what the Labor Contracts Committee really does. In addition, we noticed that there seemed to be confusion about how the negotiating process works when the town or the Board of Education negotiates with the unions representing the town's employees. As a consequence, we on the LCC have decided to take certain steps to enhance communications between the LCC and certain key committees of the RTM and the RTM as a whole. These steps are actually procedures which were used previously back in the 1980s to assure good communications between the LCC and the RTM. Accordingly, I wish to announce that during this term of the RTM, Joshua Brown, one of our co-vice chairs, will be available to meet with the Finance Committee of the RTM. And Michael Wezek and Jill Oberlander will be available to meet with the Budget Oversight Committee, both to discuss the activities of the LCC in general and also to discuss any particular proposed collective bargaining agreement that is being submitted to the RTM for approval. In any event, we hope that the members of the Finance Committee and the BOC, following these discussions with the members of the LCC assigned to them, will report back to their respective district committees about the discussions with the LCC members. That should enable all members of the RTM to learn of the views of the Labor Contract Committee prior to the time that the RTM meets to vote upon a particular proposed collective bargaining agreement, and prior to the time that one of us on the LCC would give you our report at that RTM meeting. Now let me outline briefly what your Labor Contracts Committee does, and just importantly, what it does not do as a special committee of the RTM. First, as all of you know, the LCC reviews the proposed collective bargaining agreements as negotiated between either the Board of Education's Labor Negotiations Committee or the town's labor negotiator, and then reports to you at a meeting of the RTM about the key features of the proposed collective bargaining agreement and whether we, as a committee, recommend approval or rejection of the proposed bargaining agreement. However, please keep in mind that your Labor Contracts Committee does not negotiate the collective bargaining agreements and has no direct authority or control over the specifics of those negotiations. That authority is completely in the hands of the First Selectman through the town's labor negotiator or the BOE through its negotiating team, as the case may be. We do, however, before the negotiations begin, customarily meet with the town's negotiator or with the BOE's negotiators to hear their general strategies in connection with the pending labor negotiations and to offer our views to them as to what we believe is on the minds of most members of the RTM. Nevertheless, we are not permitted to direct or control the negotiations. Second, we meet from time to time with the town's labor negotiator and the BOE representatives to discuss long-term labor goals. The fact is, it frequently takes many years to fully implement long-term strategic goals of the town and your LCC. For instance, it took more than 4 years to convince all the unions representing the town's civilian employees to agree that new hires would be covered by a defined contribution savings plan rather than the existing defined benefit plan. Likewise, it took several years to accomplish the establishment of the health savings accounts through all of the collective bargaining units for all the civilian employees of the town. Third, in terms of long-term strategy, one of the other tasks of your RTM LCC is to meet regularly with members of the BET so that the BET is aware directly of our views on various issues relating to the labor contracts. Finally, we have worked to promote a greater degree of cooperation and coordination between the labor negotiators for the BOE and the town's labor negotiator, Al Cava. I'm happy to say that these efforts have borne fruit, and in recent years there has been significant improvement in the level of cooperation, communication, and coordination between the towns and the BOE's labor negotiators. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we had a kind of global meeting of the BOE representatives, Al Cava, and your LCC to discuss ongoing labor negotiation issues. Let me make one final observation about where we are as a town in terms of labor relations. All of you have been reading reports about state and municipal governments who are confronted with runaway labor costs and extremely expensive labor practices. In this respect, it is the view of your LCC that the town government of Greenwich has been considerably more proactive than many other state and municipal governments. Thus, the defined contribution plan and the health savings accounts that the town has successfully introduced in recent years are cutting-edge innovations in controlling long-term labor and personnel costs, and there are many state and municipal governments that are now having to play catch-up to try to introduce innovations that Greenwich has already managed to implement. This does not mean that Greenwich should rest on its laurels, and indeed there are other long-term strategic plans which the town's labor negotiators have in mind. But I believe the members of the RTM should understand that over the last 10 years, the town government has been innovative and progressive in implementing cost control measures and has managed successfully to take positions in collective bargaining negotiations that restrained even further expansions of labor costs. In other words, one of the achievements of the town has been to beat back some innovations that would have resulted in even more costs, even as we have introduced innovations that have reduced costs. In summary, your Labor Contract Committee recognizes that there is much to do, and we have committed ourselves to enhancing our efforts to communicate with you about not only what the LCC is doing, but also the town and the BOE, and to assist those organizations in confronting the challenges going forward. To further facilitate communication, this fall, one of my colleagues on the LCC will outline to you the concepts of the compulsory arbitration process that is required by Connecticut law in connection with negotiating with the employees in town. We think it's important that we outline the dynamics of this particular process, since it has an enormous impact on the positions that our negotiators have to take strategically and tactically in the negotiations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Paul Settlemeyer, an RTM representative to the Southwest Regional Planning Agency.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm here to encourage participation by the RTM and other community people, residents that are interested in Route 1 to attend a visioning session, and I'll explain what a visioning session is. That's going to start tomorrow night at the YWCA. It'll run from 7 to 8 o'clock tomorrow night. It will be running from 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 in the evening on Wednesday and Thursday. I do have flyers, and I will be contacting each district and passing out flyers, and I would ask the districts to circulate these flyers to members of the district. This visiting session represents, I believe, the definitive planning research that will go into determining what Route 1, what actions will be taken, what changes will be made during the next 10 to 20 years. This is your opportunity to participate in a major 2-year study. I think most of us probably cross Route 1 every day. Our children going to work, whether you're on foot, on bicycle, whether you're riding the bus or driving your car, I'm sure that we all have issues with Route 1. The sessions are designed over the next 2.5 days to gather input from you. We will then announce a second session that will take place in the fall, which will present some design concepts that come out of the research and meeting that is being done. This study started in January. Amy Siebert, who heads DPW, and Diane Fox from Planning and Zoning have been active participants in this program. It will be an ongoing study. It is primarily funded by federal highway transportation dollars. 80% of the costs are being funded by the Federal Highway Fund, and 20% are being funded by the state. Costs are in excess of $350,000. They will be examining every intersection between Western Junior Highway and Havemeyer. The study area encompasses Western Junior Highway to Washington Boulevard in Stamford. So it is a major study document. Come and just look at the maps, look at the thoughts that they have collected, and please input your thoughts on what you envision Route 1 to look like over the next 10 to 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Fosiliotis, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Good evening, everybody. The Health and Human Services Committee would like to recognize excellence in the town. GEMS was the recipient of the Governor's annual EMS Organization Achievement Award on May 19, 2010. The award was established in 2006 and recognizes and commends an EMS organization that has enhanced the understanding and support of the EMS system throughout the community, provide community education and other contributions to the town. So I would like you to join me in congratulating GEMS in this achievement. In addition, one member, Art Romano, received the A.E. Hertzler Knox Award, which is a statewide award that recognizes an individual for their lifetime service in emergency medical services in Connecticut. Art Romano received the award for his leadership in education and training. Bill Banbrick from District 10 noted that Art had trained a 14-year-old who was the youngest EMS participant in the town. She was recently nominated and received, or she was nominated and received the Citizen of the Year Award, and is now in college and wants to be a medical doctor. So please also join me in recognizing Art Romano for his achievement in educating and training EMS people and students within the town. Just one other side note, I was circulating within the districts a sign-up sheet for Project Renew. Please note that there was a typo, I'm sorry, but the date of 7/28 should really be 7/8. So if you can make that correction, I'd appreciate it, and just circulate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Val Stouffer, Chair of District 7.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, and guests. Whereas James Peter Orfanos, a member of this body for 7 terms, passed away on June 7, 2010, at the age of 81. And whereas Jim Orfanos served District 10 with distinction from 1976 until 1983, and District 7 with distinction from 1984 until 1989. He represented these districts as an alternate on the committees then known as the Health Committee and a delegate on the Rules Committee. Following graduation from Rutgers College and his service in the U.S. Army during the Korean War, Jim received his medical training at New York Medical College. He had a prestigious career as a physician in Manhattan and Greenwich and was elected to be president of the Connecticut Medical Society and a delegate to the American Medical Association. The members of both District 7 and District 10 have asked me to express their regard for Jim's contributions and guidance. His breadth of interest and knowledge is shown by the fact that in addition to his contributions to the health issues of Greenwich, he chose to share his involvement and intellect on the Rules Committee. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the entire membership of the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting join Districts 7 and 10 in honoring James Peter Orfanos' exemplary and productive life, and further extend our sympathy to the Orfanos family, his wife Stacy, who served for many years on the Board of Education, and to his sons Peter and Paul. Be it further resolved that this resolution be set forth in the minutes of this meeting, and that a proper copy thereof be prepared by the town clerk and sent to Jim's family.
Will the members please rise and join me in a moment of silence in memory of Dr. Orfanos. Thank you. One final note before we get into the call for tonight's meeting. You all received a memo explaining that we will schedule a meeting in July, the exact date to be determined, and the purpose of that will be to review the arbitration award that will be issued later this month, we are told, regarding the collective bargaining agreement between the town and the firefighters local. So as soon as we get further word on the schedule for that meeting, we will get it out to you. All right, that brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. I did inform our district and committee chairs of a recommended organization for our agenda, and there is one slight change. I was contacted after that email went out, and a district which had recommended item 4 be considered separately asked that they informed me they withdrew that request, and they recommended that it go on the consent calendar, which is what all others had recommended. So I will, in a moment, place on the consent calendar the following 5 items. Items 1, 2, 4, 8, and 9. I will recommend that we combine, for voting purposes, items 3, 5, and 6, which would leave to consider separately items 7 and 10. So at this point, I will now place the following 5 items on our consent calendar, and if there are no objections to those 5 items being on the consent calendar, the only information that will be heard on those tonight is what I am about to say. Item number 1 is the appointment of Catherine Weisenberger to be a member of the Board of Parks and Recreation with a term expiring March 31, 2013. Item 2 is the appointment of William Dunster to be a member of the Board of Parks and Recreation with a term expiring March 31, 2012. Item 4 is the appointment of David Weisbrod to be a member of the Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals with a term expiring March 31, 2013. Item 8 is the appropriation of $97,000 from the risk fund balance and $345,000 from the capital non-recurring fund for purposes of the March storm cleanup. And item 9 is the approval of the programs that have applied, and those applications are on file in the town clerk's office, to participate in the Neighborhood Assistance Program. Is there any objection to any of those items being placed on our consent calendar? Hearing none, I'm sorry, Mary Ferry, you're going to note the typo in item 8? Pardon me? I can't hear you, Ms. Ferry.
There's a typo in item 8, which you are aware of. Form should be from. And in item 9, in the first line, it says an act concern. It's an act concerning.
Thank you. So that does not rise to the level of an objection, correct? All right. Hearing no objections, will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Consent calendar items 1, 2, 4, 8, and 9, and proceed to poll your delegation. Let me say this. I do anticipate there will be some debate on item 7, which is the appointment of Donald Heller to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and to try and help expedite that discussion, there are sign-up sheets outside and in the front. So anyone who is interested in speaking on that item, I invite you to put your name on that list. All right. Based on the reports we received, it was suggested that we combine 3 items for voting purposes. Those are items 3, 5, and 6. Is there such a motion to suspend the rules to combine those items? It has been moved and seconded to suspend the rules to combine items 3, 5, and 6 for voting purposes. The motion to suspend the rules is not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of combining items 3, 5, and 6 for voting purposes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. So we will begin with item number 3 and proceed with those combined items before taking up the remaining separate items. May we have the resolution on item number 3, which is an appointment to the Board of Parks and Recreation. You can just summarize what it is, and we'll proceed from there.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of the Board of Parks and Recreation for a term expiring March 31st, 2012. Patrick Sline.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 3 has been moved and seconded. Karen Sadek-Khan, Chair of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and members. We interviewed Mr. Sline on April 7th, and I actually gave a report that we had done so, but we voted to postpone it till this evening. So I'll just repeat my report from then. He's a new nomination to the Board of Parks and Rec. He has a financial background. He wants to work on the finances of Park and Recreation, which caused me to explain to him that that would be better done in the RTM than on the Board of Parks and Recreation. He's interested in boys sports, crew team, lacrosse, and ice hockey, ice rink in general. He uses town parks and thinks they should be safeguarded and maintained. The comments from the committee were that the nominee should have a little more awareness of the resources of the parks versus organized sports in town. Hence the vote, which was 9, 2, and 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris von Keyserling, Chair of our Appointments Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please forgive me for dressing down. Before I get dressed down, I should say. We met with Mr. Sline on March 31st. We had a long interview with him. Much has been said by my colleague from Parks and Rec. We were looking for a point of view in Parks and Rec and which way he was coming for and what he thought was important or put emphasis on. The best I could say is that he was kind of a generalist on the matter and was coming to it fresh. The vote was for Mr. Sline, 9 in favor, 2 against, 1 abstention. Excuse me, that's Parks and Rec. 9 in favor and 3 abstentions. Districts 1, 7, and 8 abstained on the basis they really couldn't get a feel for the candidate.
Thank you. Rick Crowell, Chair of our Public Works Committee. All right. Withdraw that. Discussion on item 3. Item number 5 now comes before us. May we have that resolution? Mr. von Keyserling, Chair of our Appointments Committee.
It is the pleasurable and important duty for the Appointments Committee to make nomination for the Flood and Erosion Control Board. Item number 5 is for Mr. Anthony McLeod. Resolve the following named person nominated by the RTM Appointments Committee be appointed a member of the RTM Flood and Erosion Control Board for the term expiring 12/31/2013.
That being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. Rick Crowell with the report of our Public Works Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, fellow members. Good evening. I'd like to take this opportunity, first off, to thank the Appointments Committee and its chair for their comprehensive research and fact-finding regarding the rules and history surrounding the Flood and Erosion Control Board. The data that they provided us was very helpful in the Public Works deliberation on these candidates. And also at the onset, I would like to take this opportunity to thank both of the candidates. Obviously, we're talking about Mr. McLeod right now, but Mr. Van Houten will come up next. The Public Works Committee interviewed both of them at the same time. They were both present at our meeting, and I would say that it was a pleasure to have both of them there. They were very candid, but very patient, and we spent over an hour and a half discussing the issues regarding the Flood and Erosion Control Board and kind of a panel session. It was not your typical interview where we took up each item. We invited both of them to join us at the table. We sat down for about an hour and 45 minutes and talked about the issues in the town and the nuances around the Flood and Erosion Control Board. Both candidates were exceptionally well qualified. And again, as I said, very patient and understanding in the questioning. They were very thorough in their answers. They explained a lot of the history surrounding the Flood and Erosion Control Board and brought us up to date with all of the hard work that both of these gentlemen have contributed to this committee, especially in the last 5 or 6 years. They both feel as though it has really been since 2006 since the Flood and Erosion Control has gotten some traction. As we all know, they are working on a comprehensive study for the town that is being developed at this time. And it is just about complete. They are in the final stages of that, and both of these potential candidates were enthusiastic about continuing their work and getting these projects into some sort of list and priority fashion so that they can start to see some of their hard work come into fruition. It was important to note that they spoke very candidly that they look at flooding problems on a much broader basis. They don't get involved necessarily with the backyard flooding. They're looking to really get into a comprehensive plan in the town that would look at major flooding problems that cause safety issues and can be reverted. They don't necessarily get involved in the backyard issues that should be handled by the local boards. This would be important as they go on to their next levels of what they consider the priorities for their research. They are comprehensively now looking at the inland and riverine flooding, Yet to come, though, will be the coastal flooding areas. And as many may recall, one of the reasons that the Flood and Erosion Control Board was originally put into act back in the 1950s was in an effort to counteract the coastal flooding which had occurred from the hurricanes in that period. At this time, however, that would be the next step. They are trying to finalize their inland and riverine studies. Also in that of note is the Byram River study, which at this time they've asked their consultants to kind of put on hold until they understand what FEMA and other agencies in the government are going to do in regards to that project. But it is on the forefront and would be another aspect to the studies and the work that they will continue to do. With that being said, there's a whole history and litany of notes that we went through. A very comprehensive meeting minute program was put together by Linda Bruner, our secretary, which we distributed to our committee and our districts. Anybody would like a copy of that, I'll save you the history on all of it. It was very comprehensive, very educational for all those that have an interest. We realized that the sensitivity of the flooding touches all aspects of the town. Both candidates were of the same mind and understood that we could not prioritize one project over another, but they had to come up with some comprehensive way of categorizing the projects. That is part of their study, and they're making recommendations as to the priority of the projects. There are about 40 projects that are currently listed on the study. That study results and the data in the preliminary form are available at Town Hall. They have been distributed at the public information meetings that the Flood and Erosion Control Board has held over the last several weeks. They have gathered a lot of data in recognition of that, and they've taken us through a very comprehensive process in developing their priorities, which include the CIP, public safety, emergency response, damage to public property, and any other input that was gathered from just the neighbors in local areas that had identified themselves as prone to flooding and problems. The next step in the stormwater planning will be to complete the current study and to move forward with the coastal area, which would be a whole nother project, as none of those projects are included in the current study, and to include the Byram River area in that process. As this all moves forward, it is important to note, however, that all of these projects, although listed in priority on their own list, will be considered through the CIP process in the town. So the projects will be presented to the Public Works Department. Amy Siebert, the commissioner, will review them and have to present those projects within her capital request that would follow through the CIP process. So the town has a lot to consider. At this point, the total for the projects currently on the 40 project list total about $120 million of estimated work. So this would be a comprehensive program that would have to span at least 10 years, maybe longer. And obviously, as the coastal reports come into play, we'd have to look at how the coastal projects would interface with the inland projects. Obviously, they want to be sure that any of the projects they complete or look to move forward on have ramifications that would fall in sequence with other projects inland or upstream. So it's an important process. We did talk to the candidates about the need to potentially expand this board given the comprehensive workload that they are shouldering at this point in time. Both candidates seem to agree that although they would not recommend an expansion of the current board due to the fact that it's a very hands-on working committee, and with the smaller group they're able to formulate meetings and in their mind be productive, they did think that a couple of alternates to the board would be appropriate in order to bring them up to speed and begin to groom them in a sense to take over positions that may come vacant in the future. Overall, it was a pleasure to meet with both candidates. The Public Works Committee enjoyed their company that evening. As to item number 5 on the call, Mr. McLeod, the vote was 11-0-0 with District 3 absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keyserling of our Appointments Committee.
With your permission, Mr. Moderator, I'd like to enter in item 6 because our report was on both of them, much like the Public Works Committee.
All right, and that being offered on behalf of our committee does not require a second, so now 5 and 6 are both before us.
That's resolved that the following named person nominated by the RTM Appointments Committee be appointed a member of the RTM Flood and Erosion Control Board for the term expiring 12/31/2013. Leonard Van Houten. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Appointments Committee is pleased to renominate Mr. Anthony McLeod and Mr. Leonard Van Houten for a 4-year term of the Flood and Erosion Control Board. The Appointments Committee thoroughly advertised for candidates for these 2 seats and received 5 applications by its March deadline. All candidates were highly desirable assets in the field of flood and water engineering. The committee was supplied with voluminous information on the statutory authority, history, and performance of the Flood and Erosion Control Board up to the present time. It received a large amount of submissions from interested parties. 2 extensive papers were received by the board, from the board, on the factual and historic matters addressing the board's business. One was approximately 26 pages, and one was an executive coverage by Mr. Van Houten, about 3 pages, which would be available if anybody's interested. On May the 4th, the committee held an informational and question and answer session on the Flood and Erosion Control Board and its application to flooding in Greenwich. The committee had further opportunity to increase its knowledge on this area of their responsibility. It is fair to state that at this time, there is probably no town body more knowledgeable about the Flood and Erosion Control Board than your Appointments Committee, now the Public Works Committee. On May 18th, we held a special meeting devoted solely to the nominations of these 2 open seats for Flood and Erosion Control Board. The committee interviewed 4 of the original applicants. A 5th applicant, who was highly qualified, decided not to oppose the incumbents and withdrew from consideration at this time. He is still interested in future appointment on the Flood and Erosion Control Board if it should arise later. Each candidate was fully vetted and had ample opportunity to express his merits. Public comment and question was encouraged and received. After committee discussion, a selection vote was moved and acted on. Of the 12 districts present and voting, 12 votes were cast for Mr. Van Houten, 11 votes for Mr. McLeod, and 1 vote for Mr. Riccardi. The Appointments Committee then voted unanimously to present Messrs. Van Houten and McLeod to the June RTM for reappointment to the Flood and Erosion Control Board, as you see on the call. Our Secretary, Mr. Luca, was directed to write up and present the necessary items and explanos to the Town Clerk for such notice. For this, we thank her very much. The Appointments Committee expresses by its renomination a high appreciation and respect for the work performed for the town by these 2 gentlemen and the Flood and Erosion Control Board as a whole in addressing the flood issue solutions of this town. This is emphasized by the strong and qualified competition from other applicants whom the committee hopes will be of service to the town soon. I want to say that it's with some satisfaction and gratitude that the RTM's Public Works Committee agrees with our suggestions for appointment, and it was a pleasure to work in close association with their chairman to ensure the fullest information, and I thank him very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Crowell?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just the vote on Mr. Van Houten, since the report I gave you earlier was comprehensive as well. It was 11-0-0 with District 3 absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on items 5 and 6. Mary Ferry, District 5.
One of my district members pointed out that it's not the RTM Flood and Erosion Control Board, it's the Flood and Erosion Control Board. Therefore, I move to amend both resolutions to delete the RTM ahead of Flood and Erosion Control.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there any objection to that amendment? Hearing none, that may be adopted upon unanimous consent. Further discussion on items 5 and 6. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Combined items number 3, 5, and 6, and proceed to poll your delegation. I have the result of the vote on the consent calendar items. Those were items 1, 2, 4, 8, and 9. Those in favor, 195. Opposed, 2. Abstaining, 3. The consent calendar items have carried. All right, that now brings us to the first of our 2 remaining separate items. Item number 7. May we have the resolution on that item? The appointment of Donald Heller. Board of Selectmen have that? Dustin Anderson, Assistant to the First Selectman.
Thank you. Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be reappointed member of the Planning and Zoning Commission for a term expiring March 31st, 2013. Mr. Donald Heller.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 7 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports on this item? Beginning with Peter Berg, Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, fellow members. The Land Use Committee met with Donald Heller last Monday night. In opening remarks, Mr. Heller said he is aware that for some 50% of town residents, their homes represent their net assets. He says he bears this in mind when making decisions. Several members objected to this statement by noting the negative impact development of McMansions can have on adjacent neighbors and neighborhood character. Mr. Heller repeatedly clarified his statement by saying that while he is sympathetic to applicants, he bases his decision on the regulations. As you know, as a result of our new Plan of Conservation and Development, the first selectman has appointed 4 committees to develop plans for the future of our downtown, for housing, for transportation, and for town properties. The committees are expected to make recommendations, including changes to zoning. We asked Mr. Heller about the future of these recommendations. He said the Planning and Zoning Commission will hold public hearings on proposed zoning changes recommended by the POCD committees. He does not envision, however, amendments to the POCD which would come before the RTM. The Plan of Conservation and Development has a list of 11 quality of life goals for the town. We noted that there's 155 actions in the plan that are listed. Many of these could be implemented, but residents may not see any impact or improvement in the quality of life. In response to a question about this, Mr. Heller said he supports periodic surveys of residents to measure progress toward those quality of life goals, along with steps being taken or considered to achieve those goals. Regarding banks, Mr. Heller said the Commission recently adopted a new regulation that requires banks to obtain a special permit in addition to site plan reviews. A special permit addresses a range of issues on neighborhood impact that go far beyond a site plan review. Our vote on Mr. Heller was 5-3 with 4 abstentions. No votes were cast by Districts 2, 5, and 7. The District 2 representative said fellow members in her district feel the current commission has too much of a pro-development bias. The District 5 representative said the focus on applicants' protection of assets was wrong, that the commission is unbalanced with all full members involved or having been involved in real estate development, that the commission has failed to take effective action to curtail oversized houses in traditional neighborhoods, has failed to act on flooding issues, has given too much deference to landlords and developers in the downtown, and had not responded adequately to the appearance of an ethical conflict. The member recounted that Mr. Heller, along with another commissioner, were principals in a proposed real estate venture that would target, purchase, and flip at profit distressed properties. The premise was that these 2 members of the Planning and Zoning Commission would be able to use their influence to, quote, add value to the target properties, resulting in profits for the venture's investors. Mr. Heller strongly denied impropriety. He stated that he had been approached with a proposition and declined. He also stated that he, as Planning and Zoning Commission chairman, advised the other commissioner to present the situation to the Board of Ethics for advice and guidance, that the other commissioner had done so, and that the Board of Ethics gave guidance which had been followed. The District 5 representative maintained his original position and further asserted and added to his arguments and claims. The third no was from District 7. District 7 said Mr. Heller has served 5 years, including 1 term as chairman. There has been a disconnect between the Planning and Zoning's planning statements and its regulatory actions. Planning and Zoning has not adequately coordinated with other town departments to regulate impervious surface development, clear cutting of trees, and regrading practices, which has exacerbated flooding and otherwise had negative impacts on the character of the town. He also agreed with the District 5 representative, thinks there should be a better mix and composition on the Planning and Zoning Commission than architects, real estate developers, and lawyers that may have an indirect or direct interest in commercial gain versus public welfare. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keyserling with the report of our Appointments Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We met with Mr. Heller. By the way, this is a reappointment. He has had 2 terms. This will be the 3rd term. He has been chairman, I believe, for most of the last 2 terms. Appointment met with Mr. Heller last Monday at 7:30 solely to interview Mr. Heller. Mr. Heller stated that while constrained to follow regulation and law, he was always mindful that for most homeowners in Greenwich, the lion's share of their net worth asset was in their homes. And it was noted that he took this into account when judging the impacts of applications before the commission. It is interesting that I think in our committee, at least my impression was that meant that he was considerate of the impacts on the neighbors when an application was in front of him. It's interesting that one audience took it one way, one audience took it the other. It was basically the same statement. Mr. Heller then outlined his P&Z career of efforts to strengthen and adjust the zoning codes and develop sound planning for Greenwich. He noted that there had been good progress in implementing the new POCD by the formation of the 4 committees mentioned, and that these committees are digging in hard on their charges, and that some of the early results are reflected in the first Selectmen's Progress Report, which will be distributed, I believe, at this meeting later. P&Z itself has already approved some code changes indicated in the POCD, such as were mentioned before, banks, flood regulations, and Mr. Heller mentioned a target list of several other code changes that should be achieved within this year, particularly in the areas of lot coverage, impermeable surface, water runoff, and flooding. There was a discussion of McMansion issue and the flooding and runoff issue, which of course interests all of us, and especially there was a discussion about District 7. Mr. Heller stated that the new DPW drainage manual, which had its first revision in 50 years, the new P&Z code amendments, and other initiatives which are in the pipeline will begin to bring a visible relief to neighborhoods as this goes on. There was a full discussion of planning and zoning issues, plus Mr. Heller's approach to them. There was a discussion about the question of the composition of the board. It was Mr. Heller's opinion that the P&Z, because of the complexity and sophistication, not to mention, I would say, my own the money that goes behind these applications, it's imperative that people on this board have more than good intent. They have to have an expertise to be able to match the paid professionals that are coming in these applications. So he felt it was important to have an engineer, an architect, and other such people on the board that could give a solid and strong vetting of these applications. The Appointments Committee voted 11 in favor, 1 against, and 0 abstentions in favor of recommending the RTM reappointment of Mr. Heller to the P&Z Commission. The delegate from District 7, the only negative vote, explained that she felt Mr. Heller was well qualified for reappointment, but that she had to vote her district's position for a turnover on this board. Thank you.
Thank you. Before calling for discussion on this item, I would like to announce the vote on our combined items. Those are items 3, 5, and 6. Those in favor, 196. Opposed, 4. Abstaining, 2. Those items have carried. All right, discussion now on item number 7. Peter Tessie, our first selectman.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. The role that the Board of Selectmen plays in nominating citizens to boards and commissions is a serious one, and that process has been enhanced through the years by the establishment of a Nominations Advisory Committee that works to solicit individual citizen interest in serving on these boards and commissions. Tonight you are reviewing an individual who has faithfully served the town as a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. He has served as the chairman the last several years. In our consideration of his renomination, we listen to various elements of the community. We take into account the composition of the commission and the skills that are presented, and we look at the track record of the individual. The board unanimously recommends this candidate to you for reappointment. In my decision to support the renomination of Mr. Heller, I focused almost exclusively on the work that he has done to have the town 2009 Plan of Conservation and Development brought before you after a very lengthy public input process, and to have it adopted. While we all know that this is a document that did not receive 100% approval by this body and contains ideas, suggestions that are not necessarily embraced by all, the majority of this body supported the plan. It is the plan in which we are proud tonight to present to you a progress report on, which I believe was distributed. Mr. Heller has worked very cooperatively with my office, with the various town departments that are responsible for seeing to it that the various 150 some odd action items identified in the plan see some action. He has also been an integral part of the 4 issue committees in which there was no consensus within the town at the time the adoption of the plan took place, to formulate broad representative committees to come to some consensus and bring those ideas back before each and every one of you, as well as other requisite town bodies. He has been forthright, he has been consistent, and he has been earnest in his duties. Issues that have been raised regarding conflicts of interest certainly were not looked upon mildly by the Board of Selectmen. I know in my interview with Mr. Heller, I specifically spoke to him about this and asked him if in fact he had any real estate dealing within the town, and his answer was no. I subsequently verified that. He did mention one incident where a member of the commission had sought his guidance, and he advised that individual that he would think about it and get back to him. His reply to that is he did, and there was no further action or consideration. I think what I've assessed the situation to be is that there are those who still have doubts about that, and then there are those who just simply don't like the current complexion of the commission. And I say to you that change in this town happens slowly, and I would not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in not bringing back Mr. Heller to complete the job that he is working to do in an effort to just get another face. I, for one, believe we need his leadership to see the plan that is in process to the next step, and I would ask that you would put faith in the elected Board of Selectmen as we consider future nominations to balance the composition and provide some of the additional skills that were mentioned, as well as representation that you'd like to see. But I certainly do not think casting aspersions on someone who, in my humble opinion, I'm speaking personally, who has earnestly and faithfully served the town is fair or just. If you don't support someone because of their philosophical view on the town and its plan, then say that and act accordingly. But please, don't cast aspersion in which there is no fact to back up. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it is my great pleasure to welcome back a wonderful former RTM member, Donald Landsman, to be followed by Harry Labine of District 11.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm Donald Landsman. I'm a member of District 11, and I'm here to talk about Donald Heller. I've known Donald Heller for many years, and I know him to be an honest, ethical, hard-working man. Any suggestion to the contrary is at best wrong, and at worst wrong and mean. I have witnessed his dedication to the town and to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The number of hours he dedicates to the Commission's work is staggering. For the past few years, my neighbors and I have been fighting the plan of the Aquarian Water Company to build a horrendous structure which would adversely impact our area. The Planning and Zoning Commission, chaired by Donald, held many hearings to try and solve the issues. There is a tension between the water company's claim that they needed the expansion to bring water safely to the town, and the neighborhood's desire not to see our area made ugly or our home values savaged. Donald and his commission did a great deal of investigation, and through their hard work, we managed a solution that was acceptable to all. The neighborhood got a landscaping plan that will hide the new structures. It will hide the old structures, which are now not landscaped. And trees will be planted along the road so that the entire neighborhood will benefit and yet still allow the water company to upgrade their facility. During this period, in addition to attending the meetings of the Planning and Zoning Commission, I also attended the meetings that the Planning and Zoning Commission holds on the Monday afternoon prior to the Tuesday evening meetings that they have. Once again, I found the discussions informed and fair. Donald runs a very good meeting. Everyone freely expresses his or her opinion. He does not attempt to dominate the meeting, yet he keeps it on track. If I were on the RTM, I would vote to confirm the nomination. Thank you.
Thank you. Harry Labine, to be followed by Franklin Bloomer of District 5.
Mr. Moderator and fellow members, I speak on behalf of the nomination of Don Heller. He was first appointed to the Planning and Zoning Commission as an alternate member in September 2004. In March 2006, he was appointed a full member of the commission to replace a member who resigned. He was appointed to a full 3-year term in March 2007. He therefore has been a full voting member of the Planning and Zoning Commission for 4 years. Persons appointed to the Planning and Zoning Commission make an extraordinary, substantial commitment to town government. Except for an August break, the Commission has public meetings to hear applications every 2 weeks. In a typical year, there are about 25 meetings. They occur on Tuesdays, and as anyone who has attended the meetings can attest, they often last many hours. In addition, the Commission has a briefing session, as Don Lansman mentioned, on the preceding Monday to review the agenda. These sessions are open to the public. They usually last 3 or 4 hours. The typical agenda for a meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission has at least 10 applications. I do not know how many decisions of the Planning and Zoning Commission Don has participated in during those 4 years, but it has to be in the hundreds. There has never been an assertion of any kind that Don at any time or in any way exercised bias or favoritism when deciding any of those applications. For 4 years, he has contributed an extraordinary amount of time and energy to the town of Greenwich. His record is that of a conscientious and impartial member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. It would be a gross injustice, in my view, to deny his application to the Commission. A couple of comments regarding things said at the Land Use Committee, where Don was interviewed. There were members of the public present and that complained of the Commission's failure to stop overdevelopment and urged that Heller not be renominated. Several members of the Land Use Committee voted no to the Heller nomination because of concern regarding overdevelopment. In residential areas, the overdevelopment question is how much house should be allowed on a given plot of ground. In 2003, in response to a sense of the meeting resolution of the RTM, the Commission imposed for the first time FAR limits in the 2 and 4 acre zones and reduce the FAR in the smaller zones. However, in the view of some residents, this has proved to be inadequate, and there should be further limits. I know there are many Greenwich residents, including members of the RTM, who agree with this, and I should add I have no doubt of the genuineness of their belief and their concern for Greenwich. However, I can guarantee you that there are many residents and RTM members who strongly disagree. Again, I add that I have no doubt of the authenticity of their belief and their concern for our town. However, for those who criticize the P&Z for failing to impose further limits on house size are in effect complaining that the Commission has failed to take their side on this extremely contentious debate. To deny appointment of Don because he is in some way responsible for this failure is inappropriate and, in my view, terribly unfair. In closing, I have a very simple solution to those who would have the Planning and Zoning Commission amend house size regulations. Bring before this RTM a sense of the meeting resolution that states what you believe should be adopted. For example, that the FAR should be reduced by 5 or 10%, or that a percentage limitation on house footprint be adopted, or that setbacks be really increased, or whatever. If a majority of this RTM would approve such a resolution, I can practically guarantee you the Planning and Zoning Commission would adopt the appropriate amendments to the building zone regulations. I urge you to support the nomination of Don Heller.
Thank you. Franklin Bloomer, District 5, to be followed by Mr. Heller.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of town meeting, I'm quite prepared to second Mr. Levine's comments about what a bear of a job the service on the Planning and Zoning Commission is. It is probably the most difficult, most time-consuming, most all-consuming, if you will, job that we have in our volunteer form of government. So it's not a lot of fun for me to get up and oppose the nomination of somebody who's willing to give the kind of time that any member of this commission needs to give, but I do oppose it. My reasons for opposing it were summarized by Mr. Berg. I'd like to start with the point about his being sympathetic to applicants because of the importance to many homeowners of the value of their homes. That's the way he put it, and in the discussion in the Land Use Committee, it was pretty clear that what he meant was a slant, if you will, toward the applicant, not toward the neighboring properties. And I think that's the wrong slant for a commissioner of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The value of real estate is a function of what you can do with it. And zoning exists so that an individual property owner, to limit what an individual property owner can do with his or her property so that it does not negatively impact surrounding properties or wider community values. And an interesting case in point is one that Mr. Kroll alluded to in his report on the Flood and Erosion Control Board. The growth in impervious surfaces that has resulted from the kind of development that we've seen in Greenwich has resulted in an inadequate flood control system, which is going to cost a lot of money. I think the figure that Mr. Kroll mentioned was $150,000 to deal with. Did I get the number wrong?
Let's not worry about that.
Okay.
Let's talk about Mr. Heller.
So the number one, to the extent that the slant is toward applicants, that's the wrong slant for a commissioner. A commissioner should be balancing community values versus the applicant's values. Second point, the composition of the Planning and Zoning Commission as it currently stands consists entirely of persons who are or were, when they were professionally active, involved in real estate development. Of the 5 full members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, there are 2 architects, 1 developer, one investor in real estate development, and one engineer who, when he was active, worked primarily in the real estate industry. Real estate developers look at the community in terms of real estate development. They see it, if you will, as a checkerboard of development sites, of building lots. There is no conservationist, there is no preservationist, there is no lawyer on this commission. That's an imbalance, and we can begin by redressing that balance by voting no to this nomination this evening. The final point is the one I am most reluctant to speak about, but must speak about, and that is an insensitivity that I believe Mr. Heller has to the conflicts of interest situation that he finds himself in, and that indeed all of the members of a commission consisting entirely of developers will find themselves in serving on this commission. I'm the former chairman of the Land Use Committee, and while I was chairman, a member of the public informed me about an investment opportunity which disturbed me. The key facts, as described to me by this individual, were that a group of investors would pool their funds and purchase distressed properties, hold them until the market improved, and then sell them. Nothing wrong with that. But it was stated, presumably as an additional reason to participate in the transaction, that the group behind the transaction included 2 members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. That, my informant found troubling, and I find it troubling. I subsequently learned that the 2 Planning and Zoning members were Don Heller and Frank Farraker. I got conflicting information about their respective roles in the transaction, but Mr. Heller, importantly, confirmed to me that there had been such a proposed transaction, and contrary to what he told the Land Use Committee on Monday evening, he told me that he had made limited efforts, granted limited efforts, but nonetheless efforts, to market the transaction. The transaction, however, was never consummated. Particularly in light of the fact that the deal did not go forward, there was no violation of the town's code of ethics, which incidentally is a very weak code. The League of Women Voters has done a study of our code and has made specific recommendations, which I understand are under consideration by the Board of Selectmen. But I nonetheless felt that the information that I had received from a member of the public was relevant to the RTM, because we are the appointing authority in our town government. I therefore described the transaction at the Land Use Committee meeting Monday evening, and you heard Mr. Berg's report. A vote for Mr. Heller this evening would, in my view, be a vote to approve, condone, whatever, the participation of planning and zoning members in similar real estate transactions and marketing such transactions, in part by describing their participation. That was essentially the concern that the person who came to me had, and please bear it in mind when you vote this evening. I cannot vote for Mr. Heller on that basis alone, although I disagree with him profoundly on the philosophy that he brings to the job. Please join me this evening in voting against this renomination, this reappointment. Thank you.
Donald Heller.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me okay? Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. First and foremost, I have not invested in nor been a participant in the real estate business in Greenwich. The mere fact that I become acquainted with opportunities, if they are opportunities, and turn them down is no reason at all to question somebody's integrity. Now, let me tell you about the Planning and Zoning Commission. Itself, it's never been, to my knowledge, reviewed whether being involved in a real estate business is a problem. The RTM has, on the other hand, approved the nomination of several real estate professionals, such as architects, lawyers, agents in the past. Perhaps this is a worthwhile decision to examine, but let me tell you how the commission operates. When a commissioner feels a particular application before the commission would present a conflict or even the appearance of such a conflict, he simply recuses himself and leaves the room. This conflict could be due to a business involvement, a personal relationship, or for that matter, any subject which the commissioner feels might not enable him or her to be objective. This subject, as you might guess, has been discussed at great length with town council, and some commissioners have sought opinions of the ethics board, both for full disclosure and for guidance to avoid problems. There are many examples in the past to illustrate these recusals. The present P&Z Commission includes an active lawyer, a real estate broker, and an architect with successful businesses in Greenwich. The solution is not as simple as it sounds. If the requirements for selection involve up-to-date knowledge, particularly technical knowledge, of property sites, water, sewage and drainage issues, and current business issues, then it might be smart to have younger active commissioners in addition to those already retired. Since they earn a living in the very business that the commission deals with, they must be of high moral character so as not to compromise the commission or themselves. As I said, this is perhaps a subject for review. But regarding Donald Heller, I am not in the Greenwich real estate business. Now, as to my nomination, ladies and gentlemen, before you, for renewal of my term as commissioner, I ask you to review my performance. Harry Levine was correct. We've examined well over 150 applications during my regime, so to speak. And an examination of the 150 applications will reveal very, very quickly no prejudice towards development or non-development or to a single applicant relative, above all, the community he lives in. I was elected unanimously as chair by my fellow commissioners because they concluded my relationships with the public, leadership skills, and planning experience would provide solid guidance and deliberation in planning and zoning reviews. A number of you RTM members have appeared before us as applicants or as supporters or opponents of applications. These range from new or altered sites to such major projects as the high school auditorium, the Aquarian water site, the Coscob Power Plant Park, Nathaniel Wilverall, and so on. I ask you, did the commission do its job with intelligence, goodwill, and logical understanding of the problems and solutions? Check anybody who was involved and see if the opinions granted by the commission was slanted in any way. Some 60 Greenwich citizens, that's right, 60, accepted nominations, by the first selectman for the 4 POCD committees and the Plan Implementation Committee, which includes a number of RTM members. P&Z exercised its planning function by dealing directly with 4 areas which required attention, but for which there was no clear-cut consensus about moving ahead. The first selectman crucially recognized that organized attention to the problems of housing, downtown, transportation, and town properties might actually lead to consensus and direction for the future. P&Z set up, in addition, a plan implementation committee to help ensure that the plan was moving ahead on a priority basis. As with the entire POCD, many interested leaders in the town are included, ranging from you at the RTM and including the BET, plus residents and all appropriate town departments. Please note, by the way, that the committee reports must be brought to the attention of you, ladies and gentlemen, annually. Now, many of you are seriously concerned about flooding and drainage. We totally share your deep concern, and we are addressing it as our #1 priority. You who are involved, please note, we have already set 2 public meetings on this issue, and will be prepared to issue new lot coverage, impervious surface regulations on completion and release of the drainage manual by the Department of Public Works. I want to continue, with your blessing, to complete the work on a number of new regulations. Example, changes in lot coverage, special permit work for the R6 zone, and other actions in the POCD. It takes time, ladies and gentlemen, to bring a new or altered regulation to fruition. It must be legally defensible, mitigating legal risks to the town when we move forward. Note that the FAR regulations succeeded some years ago because they were thoughtfully conceived and thorough. I have the experience and background now to continue as the P&Z leader to help bring required changes to fruition. Please consider all of the above when you vote on my nomination, and thank you.
Thank you. Irv Porter, District 6.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I rise in support of Donald Heller as a nominee for the Planning and Zoning Commission. For these reasons: first, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've spent more personal time in planning and zoning meetings that were related to the Plan of Conservation and Development and Flood and Erosion Control Board than perhaps anybody here. I know what the ties are, and I also know what the downside is relative to the community. And I can also appreciate that in major projects where monies are going to have to be allocated, that there has to be a process established that we can be proud of and support and understand and ultimately act upon when it comes to the disposition of funds. There were 4 areas in the Plan of Conservation and Development that I happen to be an advocate of. One was finding a way to refurbish or rebuild the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, and a group spent 5 years working on that subject. Second, to make sure that there were adequate playing fields for what is still a very, very strong volunteer program that I've been a part of for over 35 years. Third, to make sure that we maintain the character of our communities. Translated, that our communities, which in most cases within the town of Greenwich are focused on our school system, that we maintain the integrity because the school system, the public school system, is so important. And last but not least, to help catalyze the action that's been taken by Flood and Erosion Control Board and DPW when it comes to the lack of adequate capacity for storm drainage. And given that involvement, and I urge you to have the same involvement, you heard from Mr. Heller that all of these items are being addressed in the Plan of Conservation and Development. And under the leadership of the First Selectman, there are action committees that you asked for, that we all asked for, because we didn't want to just have a plan. We wanted to have a plan with some teeth in it. Through that whole process, I've observed Mr. Heller, as well as the entire body. I think they have the composite skill sets which are not perfect. Maybe there's room for improvement, but on balance, they understand the planning and zoning process within the community and the statutes at the local, the state, and the federal level that we have to deal with. They also understand the local problems. As a result, the drainage manual, which is, as someone indicated, well over 50 years old, will finally be updated. They've made the commitment they're going to take some action relative to impervious surfaces. You can go on. You wanted action, you're getting action. That, in my judgment, is a reflection of the leadership of Mr. Heller and the entire Planning and Zoning Commission and the staff led by Diane Fox to make sure that we're doing the right things in this community for the long term, and that our benefactors, our kids, our grandkids who choose to live here will be better for it. So on the basis of his wisdom, his leadership, his intellectual honesty, he's been very forthright in saying where he is relative to certain situations and fully disclosing what his situation is. And in the context of full disclosure, I got to tell you that I have to fully disclose my situation. I'm a homeowner. I think most of you are as well. I don't always agree with my neighbor. And I don't always have the same view of my neighborhood as my neighbor. And because there's a process for that to be addressed with professionals that sit on planning and zoning appeals, the bottom line is we're treated fairly and equitably. And that can only come from wisdom and leadership. Please support Mr. Heller.
Further discussion on item 7. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 7, and proceed to poll your delegation. All right, before proceeding with our final item, I'm going to call on Peter Tessie, who asked to address us on the implementation of the Plan of Conservation and Development. So at this point, he had to attend to some business earlier, and so now is the appropriate time. Peter Tessie, our first select.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. As you know, the Plan of Conservation and Development was adopted by this body last June. And since then, my office, working with the Planning and Zoning Commission, the town planner, and several dozen citizenry, members of boards and commissions, have been working to implement many of the recommendations. Tonight we've distributed to you a narrative which describes the history of this particular plan, the action steps that we are undertaking, and the status of the 4 committees that were called for within the plan. In addition, we have distributed to you the document that contains the 155 unique action items that are enumerated, showing the status on those items to date. I do want to make clear that this document is a working document and will be updated on a quarterly basis, but it has taken great time and care on the part of your professional staff, our professional staff at the town, to sit down and review this status and provide us, the implementation committee, then ultimately you, and the citizenry, precisely where are they in the implementation of those items. We will be conducting a public meeting in the fall to solicit public input on the status of the plan. So we will be presenting where we are in September and then giving the public an opportunity to provide their voice as to the particular topics in which we present, such as the area of the downtown, housing, transportation, and the like. This is an important part of the overall planning process is to have a continual dialogue. I am pleased to report that many of you are extremely involved in the work we are doing, and I particularly want to recognize and commend Peter Berg, the chairman of your Land Use Committee, for being a regular participant at all of our committee, if not all, almost all of our committee meetings. The representative town meeting has responsibility, in addition to its members, chairing and participating in the POCD committees. Progress and full implementation will be dependent upon changes to regulations and policies that require RTM approval. Depending on the public's priority and sentiment, time in the form of staff capacity and additional resources may have to be appropriated in order to meet a more expeditious implementation schedule. Perhaps most importantly, the RTM should continue to be an active participant in the POCD committee meetings and annual public meeting. The Plan of Conservation and Development is a reflection of the values of the residents of Greenwich. If there is not an ongoing conversation about these values, the POCD risks being implemented in a vacuum, which would be detrimental to the character and quality of our community. So again, thank you for the opportunity to provide you a status report. This certainly was called for in the plan, and a wonderful opportunity to share with you in written form its status, as well as the particular status to the 155 specific implementation action items. You can find information regarding the committee meetings, agendas, minutes on the town website, and that link has been referenced in this report to you. Again, I thank you for your patience and appreciate your time.
Thank you. That now brings us to our final item on our agenda tonight, which is item number 10. May we have the resolution on that item? Princess Urfe, Director of Community Development.
Thank you and good evening. Resolved that the sum of $26,921 be and the same is hereby appropriated to be added to CDBG Capital Project account number Q197009-59900-29216, known as Family Center's Warburg Center Kitchen Rehabilitation Project.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 10 has been moved and seconded. Karen Fossiliotis, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Good evening. Princess Urfe of the Office of Community Development and Bob Short of Family Centers explained the requested appropriation of $26,921 to the committee. In 2009, Family Centers received funding from the Connecticut Development Business Grant Program in the amount of $60,000 to replace kitchen cabinets and counters in all 7 classrooms in the central kitchen at the Warburg Center on Bridge Street that had originally been installed in 1993. Of the $60,000, $45,238 was spent to replace these items, leaving a balance of $14,762 in unused funds. When the kitchen cabinets were installed, it was discovered that the cabinet depth of a standard floor cabinet was less than the cabinets that were originally installed in 1993. This resulted in a gap between the flooring and the bottom of the cabinet. The resulting gap resulted in the concrete flooring showing between the bottom of the cabinet and the edge of the flooring. Besides being unsightly, the gap is a potential health hazard as it's difficult to clean and collects materials that could harm 3- and 4-year-old children crawling on the floor. The net result is that, in their analysis, the existing flooring requires replacement. The estimated cost to replace the flooring is $41,683. Subtracting the $14,762 remaining from the original $60,000, the net amount required to fund the project is $26,921. Princess Urfe noted that the money requested by Family Centers would be coming from entitled money received from HUD. The Community Development Program received a $948,000 grant from HUD, and the $26,921 would be a contingency line item that would be transferred to this project. Ms. Urfe noted that this money is not town money, but is allocated from the HUD grant that can only be used for Connecticut Development Business Grant programs. They are coming to the RTM because they follow the town budgetary procedures for allocations to projects. It was asked whether there might be a less expensive solution to replace the flooring. Bob Short indicated that filling the gap would be a temporary fix. The floor is worn and is in need of replacing, and finding the same vinyl flooring is next to impossible to match the tiles. Mr. Short stated in essence that replacing the flooring was, in their view, the best solution at this time. Our committee voted to approve the Family Centers Warburg Center request that the amount of $26,921 be appropriated to the CDBG capital project account number Q19709-599-0029216 to the full body of the RTM by a vote of 12-0-0.
Thank you. Gordon Ennis, Chair of our Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fellow members of the RTM, distinguished guests. The Finance Committee met on this item. Can't hear me? Command voice, huh? The Finance Committee met on this item on June 7th at 7:30 in the Town Hall Lounge. The vote, after extensive discussion, was 5-6-0 with District 1 absent. The yes votes were from Districts 4, 5, 6, 10, and 12, and the no votes came from Districts 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, and 11. I think by now you know the issues here. I think it was well outlined by the prior speaker. The Finance Committee sees the issue somewhat differently for these reasons. The majority on the committee believed that the center can fix the problem in a way that would comply with any aesthetic standard for a few $100 or perhaps $1,000 by simply inserting a strip of vinyl or some other material to cover the 1-inch by 1/4-inch space that remains, because the footprints of the new cabinets are smaller than the footprints of the old cabinets. If it was your house, that's what you would do with it, and if it was my family center, that's what I would do with it. Also, we have to keep in mind that these projects are evaluated by CDAC, which is the Community Development Advisory Council, and allocations are made based on merit among all of the competing entities. So there's some 18 to 22 entities in town that receive money from this block grant. The project, as described in the resolution and the explanos, as being incidental to the replacement of the cabinets, is really not incidental to the replacement when you consider that the floor replacement is about equal in dollar expenditure as the cabinet replacement was. And rooms that are involved in being replaced, the floors that are being replaced are going to be replaced in bathrooms and in the classrooms, in the whole facility, not just the areas where the cabinets were installed. So this essentially, in the majority judgment, is a new project, and it should compete for funds with all the other projects. At least we believe that if that were the case, it would be a rational expenditure then, and not an expenditure that we're looking at now. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 10. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 10, and proceed to poll your delegation. I have the result of the vote on item number 7, the appointment of Donald Heller to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Those in favor, 124, opposed, 49, abstaining, 29. That item is carried. Since item 10 is the last item to come before us tonight, we will need to await the result of the vote on that item before proceeding to adjourn. All right, ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? A member has approached me and indicated that depending on the result of this vote, there may be a motion to reconsider and seek a second vote. So I encourage you to remain in the event of that possibility. All right, based on what I have been alerted to, Mr. von Keyserling is the individual who alerted me to what he was planning to do. And as we don't have the final vote yet, but it looks like this would be defeated. Mr. von Keyserling changed his vote from yes to no so that he could make a motion to reconsider. A motion to reconsider must be made by someone who voted on the prevailing side. All right, you voted no. I had heard from your district chair otherwise, but okay, I'll take that for what you say. I don't know yet. We don't have all the cards, but the reason I am speaking now is those who voted no on this ought not to leave if you want to protect that vote. Depending on the reasons for this motion, we'll see if in fact we will take another vote, but that is where it stands now. Do we have all the cards? All right. I'll have that final vote for you shortly. I have the result of the vote on item number 10. Those in favor, 52. Opposed, 136. Abstaining, 5. That item has failed. Mr. von Keyserling?
Mr. Moderator, according to the rules, I would like to make a motion to reconsider on the basis. Should I state the reason?
Please, state your reason.
The purpose of a vote to reconsider is if information came to hand after the fact of the vote that may have material import on that vote. What happened apparently was there were discussions by the reports from the RTM on their opinions on this item. The proponent or the applicant, family centers, wished to speak on this to clarify and give information that would be important to consideration, and they did not speak, perhaps because of the confusion on their part being new to this. I think it's fair that we get a chance to hear from them. Perhaps they have information which...
We will take a vote on this, so let's just be patient.
I just think if one wishes to hear what they have to say, fine, but we should be giving them the opportunity for that.
All right, and you voted on the prevailing side.
Correct.
You voted no, and now you want to reconsider that. Okay.
Whatever the
Is
will
there a
of the
second? It has been moved and seconded to reconsider the vote on item number 10. That motion is debatable because item number 10 was debatable. Any discussion on the motion to reconsider? Mr. Kavi? Yes. There is a quorum. Our quorum is 77. Yes. I can see we have far more than 77. Further discussion on the motion to reconsider? Yes, sir. Oh, we will vote on the motion to reconsider, and the motion to reconsider requires a majority vote to pass. Further discussion on the motion to reconsider. All those, if you are in favor of taking a second vote on item number 10, you should vote in favor of Mr. von Keyserling's motion to reconsider. If you want to proceed to adjourn the meeting, essentially you should vote no, because then all business will have been transacted. All those in favor of the motion to reconsider, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That motion has failed. There being no further business to come before the meeting, and absent objection, this meeting stands adjourned upon unanimous consent. Thank you all for coming, and have a very safe trip home. And we'll see you in July.